When we look at an Irish castle today, its design can seem mysterious. Doorways are narrow, windows resemble slits, staircases twist through the thickness of the walls, openings appear in ceilings, stone platforms project above entrances, and defensive walls surround buildings that were also family homes. None of these features were accidental. Every doorway, staircase, and opening represented a compromise between security and comfort. The castle had to protect its occupants, their possessions, and often their livestock. But it also had to function as a home, a workplace, and a visible statement of power. In this documentary, we will step inside the architecture of Ireland's castles and tower houses. We will discover how their defences worked, what popular stories may have exaggerated, and why the safest building in the district was not always a pleasant place to live. Before examining the defences, it is important to understand that the word castle covers several different kinds of buildings. The Anglo-Normans introduced major stone castles to Ireland from the late 12th century. These could include great keeps, curtain walls, gatehouses, towers, and large enclosed courtyards. Centuries later, the Irish landscape became filled with much smaller tower houses. These were tall, rectangular, fortified residences built mainly during the 15th and 16th centuries by both Gaelic Irish and Anglo-Irish families. The tower house was not simply a miniature royal castle. It was the strong home of a local lord or prosperous landowner. It offered protection against cattle raids, rival families, and relatively short attacks. It also displayed the owner's wealth, authority, and control of the surrounding territory. Some could resist a determined assault, but most were not designed to survive indefinitely against a large army equipped with heavy artillery. The castle's defensive design began before a single stone was laid. Builders chose locations that offered natural protection, control, and visibility. Castles appeared beside rivers, lakes, coastlines, crossings, and important routes. Ochnanure Castle in County Galway stands on a rocky outcrop beside the Drimmen River. It was the stronghold of the O'Flaherty Lords of West Connacht, and its access to the waterways around Lough Corrib was strategically valuable. Kidavanent Castle overlooks Achill Sound, while Ballyhock Castle commands a steep valley above the Waterford estuary. Water could resist an attacker's approach, facilitate movement, and supply the household. A rocky outcrop provided a strong foundation and made parts of the castle difficult to reach. The surrounding landscape was therefore not merely a beautiful setting, it formed part of the defensive system. Many Irish tower houses stood inside a walled enclosure known as a bawn. The bawn could contain working buildings, storage areas, and accommodation. Crucially, it could also provide temporary protection for cattle. In late medieval Ireland, cattle represented wealth. A raid did not necessarily aim to capture the castle itself. Stealing livestock could damage a rival family while enriching the attackers. When danger approached, animals could be driven behind the bawn wall. Defenders could then watch its entrances and wall walk. Some sites became remarkably complex. Ochnanure Castle developed inner and outer bawns, while Palace Castle retains a substantial enclosure with the gatehouse, defensive walkways, and projecting turrets. The tower house offered a final refuge, but the bawn protected the household's wider economic life. Every castle required an entrance, and every entrance created a weakness. Stone walls could be several feet thick, but a doorway had to open. Attackers could burn it, batter it, or attempt to force it from its hinges. Castle builders responded by turning the entrance into a carefully controlled trap. The outer doorway was kept relatively narrow and fitted with a heavy timber door. Iron fittings, bars, and a metal lattice gate known as a yett could provide additional protection. Above the entrance, defenders might use a machicolation, a projecting stone structure with openings in its floor. From there, they could drop stones or other materials directly onto anyone attempting to attack the door. Ballyhack Castle is protected externally by a machicolation, but passing beneath it did not mean an attacker was safe. Inside the entrance passage was another opening called a murder hole. Anyone who broke through the outer door could become trapped in the confined space below while the defenders attacked from overhead. The castle's apparent weaknesses had become one of its most dangerous locations. Stories of medieval castles often describe defenders pouring boiling oil on their enemies. Some Irish heritage sites include oil among the materials that could have been used. However, oil was valuable, useful, and comparatively expensive. It would not necessarily have been the defender's first choice. Stones were readily available, heated water was easier to obtain, while hot sand could enter gaps in clothing and armour. The precise material mattered less than the advantage created by the architecture. Attackers were confined beneath an opening, while defenders remained protected above them. The murder hole was effective because it gave control of the space to the occupants of the castle. The narrow openings visible in the lower walls of many Irish castles were not conventional windows. Arrow loops allowed the defender to observe or fire while presenting only a small target to someone outside. Later, castles and modified bawns could also contain gun loops designed for firearms. Narrow openings preserved more solid masonry and were difficult to climb through, but they admitted very little light. Lower floors were frequently used for storage and service functions. Security mattered more than comfort. The contrast became obvious higher in the tower. Upper chambers might have larger, mullioned windows, window seats, fireplaces, and wall cupboards. The most comfortable and impressive rooms were therefore often located towards the top of the building, above the darkest and most heavily protected levels. Even the windows expressed the social hierarchy of the household. Irish castles are also famous for their narrow spiral staircases. A popular explanation claims that staircases always turned clockwise as they rose. According to the story, this gave a right-handed defender more room to swing a sword while restricting an attacker climbing from below. It is an appealing explanation, but it should not be treated as a universal rule. Castle staircases did not turn in the same direction, and historians debate how important sword fighting was in deciding their orientation. A narrow spiral staircase could certainly slow an attacker. One person might block the passage, and the steep, uneven steps made rapid movement difficult. But practical matters also influenced the direction and position of a staircase. The internal layout, the location of rooms, available wall space, and the way the staircase connected different floors. The defensive advantage may have existed in some buildings, but the familiar right-handed swordsman story is too simple to explain every castle. Tower houses used height to separate functions and increase security. Ground floor rooms were usually the easiest to reach and often the least comfortable. They could be used for storage, provisions, and equipment. Private apartments and principal living spaces were placed higher. Reaching them meant passing through narrow doorways and controlled staircases. Stone vaults divided some floors. These strengthened the building and provided greater resistance to fire than an entire timber structure. Wooden floors could still burn or decay, but a stone vault might prevent the destruction from immediately spreading through the whole tower. The flat or pitched roof area and wall walk provided observation points. Battlements offered partial cover, while projecting corner turrets, called bartizans, allowed defenders to watch areas close to the walls. From the roof, occupants could see movement across the surrounding countryside long before an approaching group reached the castle. It is easy to imagine a castle as a permanent military installation, but most of the time it was a working household. Food was prepared, fires were maintained, servants moved between floors, and families ate and slept inside the same walls built to repel attackers. Fireplaces made upper chambers more habitable. Window seats took advantage of the limited daylight, and small chambers built within the thickness of the walls provided storage or privacy. Castles even included toilets known as garderobes. Waste could pass through a chute in the external wall, an arrangement that was functional, although not necessarily pleasant. Water had to be carried, food stored, and smoke controlled. The building was secure, but it could also be cold, dark, and inconvenient. The castle's inhabitants lived with consequences of every defensive decision. The Irish Tower House was particularly suited to local insecurity, sudden raids, rivalries, theft, and relatively small attacking forces. Thick walls, a defended entrance, and an elevated living quarters could make a quick attack extremely difficult. An enemy might steal animals or damage buildings outside without successfully entering the tower. But warfare changed. Cannons could damage masonry from a distance. A sufficiently large force could isolate a castle, cut off supplies, or batter its defences. By the 17th century, some tower houses were modified for firearms, while others were incorporated into more comfortable residences. Eventually, the defensive advantages no longer compensated for the cramped stairs, small windows, and inconvenient rooms. Families who could afford to do so moved into houses designed around light, comfort, and appearance rather than immediate protection. Ireland's castles were not collections of strange medieval features. They were carefully organised machines for controlling movement. The bawn protected livestock and working life. The entrance channeled visitors into a confined space. Murder holes and machicolations defended the doorway. Arrow loops allowed observation and fire. Staircases slowed movement, while heights separated vulnerable storage from safer living quarters. Yet every layer of protection made everyday life more difficult. That tension between security and comfort explains both the ingenuity of the Irish Tower House and its eventual decline. The next time you pass a ruined castle, look closely at its openings, projections, and broken walls. They still reveal how its occupants expected an attack to unfold, and how they planned to survive it. Which hidden feature of an Irish castle should we investigate next? Tell us in the comments and subscribe to Ireland Remembered for more stories from Ireland's history, folklore, and landscape. Thank you for listening.